Foundations is my favorite Magic set of the year, and it's not even close. Wizards wanted to make a set that is perfect for onboarding new players to Magic, and they absolutely knocked it out of the park. There are amazing new cards for us veteran players, but there's also a ton of amazing reprints, and most importantly though, the overall complexity of the set is much lower than your average Magic the Gathering set. It means that the cards are easier to understand. Reading the card actually does explain the card, and not only that, these cards are simplified, but they're still really exciting to play and get into. Foundations is comprised of the main set, which are standard legal cards, which are going to be standard legal for 5 years, which means you can buy them and not worry about them rotating out really quickly. And it also means they're going to be having a really large print run, and that means there's going to be a lot of supply, and the cards are going to be cheap and accessible. There's also a new Foundations Jumpstart set, which is honestly my favorite way of getting new players into Magic. You don't have to worry about deck building or any of that stuff. You just take 2 different packs, shuffle them together, and you're ready to play 1 versus 1 Magic. And best of all, there's the new Foundations Starter Kit, which is a great way to kickstart your collection and jump into the Magic the Gathering hobby. It just gives you a bunch of really, really great reprints, a lot of bang for your buck, and it's going to be aggressively priced. So it means it's the perfect way for new players who don't have a collection to immediately have a really good playable collection to start getting into the hobby. All that said, I think Foundations is an A+ set. It's one of my favorite sets they ever designed, and it's a perfect way to get new players into Magic. Now, Foundations is focused on 1 versus 1 Magic, which makes a lot of sense. You want to keep the complexity down. You want to do that by keeping things 1 versus 1. Totally on board with that. However, it must be acknowledged that the most popular format in Magic by a large majority is Commander. So I was thinking, hey, if you're a new player and you got into Magic with Foundations, you bought the starter kit, you bought like a bunch of packs or whatever, and you have a really large collection, but it's almost all Foundations cards, how do you transition that into Commander gameplay? And so I decided to make 5 Commander decks using only Foundations cards. So this is kind of like your starter Commander decks using the cards you as a new player probably will already have laying around now that you entered Magic the Gathering with a lot of Foundations products. So these 5 decks are made entirely of cards you will find in the Foundations set. That includes the standard legal cards, the Jumpstart cards, the starter kit cards, and I think a couple showcase cards which you could open up in collector boosters. I'm pretty sure. They're all from Foundations, is what I'm trying to say. The entire Foundation set is what I'm going to be using as my card pool and nothing outside of that. The end result is surprisingly viable. I would put most of these decks at the same level as the latest precons, maybe a little bit higher with some of them. But yeah, they can sit around at the average Commander night and hold their own, no problem. So if you're joining Magic through Foundations, hopefully this is a great way to introduce you to the Commander format as well. And as always, if you want to purchase these sweet new Commander decks or Foundations in general, you can do so over at our sponsor, cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. All right, we begin with my favorite deck of the bunch. This is a Rakdos Aristocrats deck led by Evereth, Viceroy of Plunder. So Evereth provides 2 very powerful roles in this Rakdos Aristocrats deck. First off, she is a repeat sack outlet. She can sacrifice creatures and artifacts, and there's going to be a lot of creatures and artifacts we want to sacrifice for value in this deck. And as you're doing that, you're going to be growing her into a legitimate threat. So she's going to be an amazing blocker early on, but then she's going to be swinging in the air repeatedly, dealing commander damage to all your opponents. And whenever she dies, like if you sacrifice her intentionally, for example, you could just pay 2 mana and just deal damage equal to her power to each opponent. Also, if you sacrifice a treasure to Evereth, she gets lifelink until end of turn. So as you're smashing people in the air, you're going to be gaining life as well if you're sacrificing a treasure that turn. And then if she dies and you pay 2 mana for her triggered ability, She's going to deal a ton of damage to each of your opponents, but you're also going to gain oodles of life in the process too. So she's providing a sack outlet for your Aristocrats deck, which is good throughout the game. And then late game, she's also turning into a lethal beater in the air. She has evasion. She can kill people with commander damage, but she can also just kill people with her death trigger. So just a multi-pronged threat at the table. It's wonderful. Evereth really pops off with a bunch of Aristocrat staples that you can find in the deck. Basically anything that can produce multiple stuff to sacrifice to her. So like Fumulus, for example, whenever you're sacrificing a non-token creature, you get a token creature that you can also sacrifice to Evereth. Or Pitiless Plunderer, which is probably the best card in the entire deck. Whenever you're sacrificing creatures to Evereth, you're going to get a treasure token. Then you can sacrifice a treasure token to grow Evereth even further. So you're getting double value out of all the things you're sacrificing. And if you're sacrificing the treasures, Evereth gets a life link until end of turn 2. So you're going to be gaining tons of life in the process. There's also ways to make Evereth an even more lethal threat. We've got Twin Flame Tyrant, so we're just going to be dealing double damage with Evereth's combat damage in the air and also her death trigger that just hits everybody for tons of damage. And we can also double Evereth's power with bulk up. So let's say Evereth is like a 10-10 or an 11-11 already. We could just cast bulk up on her, and now suddenly she can one-shot people in the air, or, you know, she dies with bulk up on her, and you just take out the entire table at once. It's fantastic. It's really good. Also, special shout out to a secondary commander that you can easily slot into the command zone. It's Alicia, who laughs at fate. This is less threatening in the command zone, which could actually be a benefit to you, because if people know what Evereth is capable of, she's going to be kill on sight. Whereas Alicia is a less threatening, more unassuming threat in the command zone that's actually just a really powerful card advantage engine. It's a recursion engine. The idea here is that basically you attack with a sacrifice fodder thing like a burglar rat or whatever. Either it dies in combat because something blocks it, or you just sacrifice it post-combat to trigger raid, and then you just return the burglar rat again at end step with Alicia's rage trigger. So you just get double value out of your smaller creatures. And the curve of this deck is very low, so there's a lot of 2-drops, for example, to immediately get back with Alicia without actually increasing her power. Or you could do things like attack with Vampire Gourmand, sacrifice a small creature, a sacrifice fodder thing, so it becomes unblockable, so you can trigger raid and draw a card, and then whatever you sacrifice, you get back with Alicia with her raid trigger at end step. So this is just a very nice incremental value engine that will probably draw less hate from the table. So it's arguably stronger. I just think Evereth is better suited in the command zone with this particular foundations restriction. However, I would think maybe if I was building this deck without any sort of like card pool restriction, I think Alicia might be actually overall stronger when properly built around. Anywho, the rest of the deck is just full of sacrifice fodder, stuff that returns itself over and over again for no extra mana, like 9 Lives Familiar, stuff that have beneficial sack triggers like Undead Butler, and also like Solemn Simulacrum too. So Solemn draws you a card, Undead Butler returns something from the graveyard to your hand. So these things want to be sacrificed over and over again for value. And then we have the sack outlets. So Evereth is a sack outlet in the command zone, but we have a ton of other ways of sacrificing creatures. Priest of Forgotten Gods is like removal, but also card draw and ramp. Liliana Dreadhorde General is more card draw. High Society Hunter, again, more card draw. And then we've got a ton of sacrifice payoffs. So Abyssal Harvester can immediately return something we sacrificed. Bastion of Remembrance is going to drain our opponents, and Midnight Reaper draws us more cards. Did I mention this deck has lots of card draw? Because it does. And then finally, to win the game, Evereth is our main win condition. We could deal commander damage, or we could just blow up all our opponents with her death trigger. But we also have a cheeky infinite that they just slid into the main set, which is Marauding Blight Priest and Bloodthirsty Conqueror. Whenever we gain life, each opponent loses 1 life, and then whenever an opponent loses a life, we gain that much life. So you have both these two things on the battlefield. You have an opponent lose life, or you gain 1 life, and then all your opponents just die. It's wonderful. So I love the fact that they just slid in an infinite into a new player set in the main set together, even just to kind of normalize infinites a little bit, which I think is really good and healthy. So that's the full list. It's a pretty straightforward Rakdos Sacrifice Aristocrats deck. Really, really powerful, I would say. It's lacking a little bit in ramp options. So I tried to keep the curve very, very low. You can see most of our stuff is just 2 drops basically. And its main benefits, its main strengths are insane resiliency, lots of card draw, lots of interaction, removal and hand disruption and stuff like that, good reanimation targets and stuff. It's just a little bit on the slow side, but it's trying to grind out the table and it's trying to be low to the ground. The next deck is your boy, Niv-Mizzet Visionary. This is, I think, the 7th incarnation of Niv-Mizzet, and as a big Niv-Mizzet stan, I'm totally happy to see him once again. This is going to be Izzet's Control Pings. I want to call it Spellslinger. It is basically a Spellslinger deck as well, but it's specifically focusing on dealing non-combat damage to our opponents to draw a ton of cards, and then utilizing all that card draw to just win the game. So our commander, Niv-Mizzet Visionary, it's just a big 5/5 beater in the air, which is great. No maximum hand size is great. And then whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you draw that many cards. So the idea is just to have a pinger on the battlefield with Niv-Mizzet on the battlefield, and we're going to just draw a crap ton of cards. So for example, Niv-Mizzet's on the battlefield, and then we have something like Firebrand Archer or Fire Spitter Whelp on the battlefield, and we cast a non-creature spell. Suddenly we deal 1 damage to each of our opponents, and then we're going to draw 3 cards off Niv-Mizzet. And that's like the low end of the deck. If we can deal more damage to our opponents, we're going to draw even more cards. We also have different styles of pingers too. So we also have Impact Tremors and General Creates, which is another Impact Tremors, for example. And whenever creatures are entering the battlefield, we get to deal the damage to each of our opponents and then draw that many cards with Niv-Mizzet too. So it's not just about Spellslinger, it's also about playing creatures and other ways of pinging our opponents for value. And as we're drawing all those cards, it kind of dovetails into our win condition. So Chandra's Spitfire, for example, whenever we're pinging our opponents, Chandra's Spitfire gets huge, it has flying, and we can easily start one-shotting our opponents. Fist of Flame, if we're drawing an oodle amount of cards with Niv-Mizzet, 10 or more cards, we can swing in with something that doesn't get blocked, something with evasion, for example, and then give it like +11/+0 with Fist of Flame and just kill that opponent out of nowhere. Same thing with like Clinquant Sky Mage. It looks very unassuming. It's a 4-mana 1/1 flyer, but when we have Niv-Mizzet on the battlefield and we're drawing oodles of cards, this can easily be a 10/10 or even bigger, and then we just dome somebody for lethal in the air. And then the rest of the deck is standard Izzet Spellslinger stuff. We have stuff like Archmage of Runes, which is a little rampant card draw, Rite of the Dragoncaller, which is another alternate win condition. It just turns all our instants and sorceries, comes with 5/5 dragons as well. And then also big classic haymakers like Rite of Replication. It doesn't really matter what our board state is. If we have like 9 mana on the battlefield and Rite of Replication in our hand, we just copy the best thing on the battlefield 5 times. And that can sometimes just win the game by itself. And yeah, this deck is just your standard Izzet Spellslinger stuff. We're trying to play control. We're trying to deal with the threats as they're coming on the battlefield, stuff that we can't handle very easily. We drop down a pinger or whatever. We drop down Niv-Mizzet. We draw a ton of cards and then utilize all that card draw to win the game. The next commander is everyone's favorite, high-powered, very scary Simic Landfall commander, and that's Tatyova. Tatyova is making a return here, and it's just saying that all the sweet green ramp you're doing, well, it's also going to draw you cards and gain you life in the process, leading you to have basically infinite mana and infinite cards in your hand. It's an incredibly potent combination. So while Foundations doesn't have too many fetch lands available to really pop off of Tatyova's ability, there are some really powerful green ramp options that are are going to just make Tatyova pop off like crazy. Two really notable ones being like Springbloom Druid and Hero. These are going to put you up a land, but also draw you 2 cards and gain you 2 life when Tatyova's on the battlefield. There's also a lot of other ways of playing additional lands onto the battlefield to get more landfall triggers. Loot, Exuberant Explorer, and Brawlios just allow you to play additional lands each turn. So there's a mix of just traditional rampant growth effects and also cards that allow you to play additional lands on each turn, and you're just going to pop off crazily with Tatyova, but also other lanefall payoffs like Lotus Cobra to generate even more mana, Scythecat Cub, which is going to grow your creatures really large with +1/+1 counters, and Rampaging Baloth, which is going to just flood the table with a whole bunch of 4/4 green beast creature tokens. And then with all the ramping you're going to be doing, there are a ton of really powerful haymakers to just close out the game with. There's the brand new Sire of 7 Deaths, which is a huge 7/7 beater with a ton of keywords. There's Coma, a new Coma, World Eater, which is just an absolute house. It's a 1-man army, and it's an army in a can because it's going to make a whole bunch of 3/3s every single time it smashes for 8 trample, which is great. And then there's the classic Genesis Wave. If you have a ton of mana on the battlefield and you have Genesis Wave in your hand and you cast it for X = 12 or whatever, I don't think your opponents are going to be winning after that. So yeah, this is classic Simic Lanefall stuff, and the Foundations card pool does it really, really well. You don't have a lot of fetch lands. You do have a couple fetch lands, common fetch lands available to pop off with Tatyova, but you don't need it. This deck is going to perform very well, and it's still going to be really good at your average commander table. The next deck kind of surprised me. This is Rodolf Duskbringer, and it is an Orzhov Lifegain deck. I was really surprised at how much powerful support options there are for the Lifelink Lifegain archetype in Foundations, but I guess it makes sense. Casual players really like Lifegain as an archetype and also Angels, and so they kind of delivered in the Foundations card pool. There's a lot of Angel support and there's a lot of Lifegain support, and you get to run all the best options for both of those things if you go Orzhov with Rodolf as your commander. So it's a Vampire Angel, it's a 4/4 flying Death Touch lifelink. It can gain Indestructible when you're gaining life, which is super easy to keep Rodolf sticking on the battlefield, which is great. And then it's just repeat reanimation. You pay 2 mana and you just get to reanimate a creature, mana value X or less, from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn. So Rodolf in the command zone provides the lifelink deck access to 2 colors, Orzhov colors, black and white, and it's a repeatable card advantage engine, recursion engine, by repeatedly, for just 2 mana, reanimating something very consistently. Even by itself, it's a flying lifelinker, so at the very least, you could hit somebody for 4 in the air, gain 4 life, and then return like a 4-drop from your graveyard to the battlefield for 2 mana. It's excellent value. So the bread and butter of any life gain deck is the life gainers. So Hinterland Sanctifier is kind of like a Soul Warden, but just for your own creatures. Creeping Bloodsucker is an amazing new reprint. The much needed reprint, and it's just going to be pinging each opponent for 1, and then if you have 3 opponents, you're going to gain 3, so it's just incredibly mana efficient life gain. And then we have various payoffs for gaining all that life. Exemplar of Light is one of the best ones because it's going to grow, but it's also going to draw us cards, and Angel of Vitality is going to increase the amount of life we're gaining from all our life gain sources. And it's important to note that a lot of these life gain payoffs are also Angels. And we actually have so many powerful Angels in the deck already that we can actually weave in very organically an Angel sub-theme. So Giada, for example, is an amazing ramp source and also an Anthem effect for all our Angels. And then stuff like Righteous Valkyrie dovetails perfectly with all our Angels and also our life gain main theme. It's going to gain us a bunch of life, and also is going to be a huge anthem for our entire army. Then we have various ways of closing out the game. Honestly, the life gain synergy pieces here are insane. We have Felidar Sovereign, you just win the game if it's on the battlefield on our upkeep and we have 40 or more life. Nykthos Paragon can grow our entire army. Valkyrie Harbinger, another Angel by the way, just poops out a lot of angel tokens to overwhelm the table. It also has lifelink. So yeah, the deck has so many powerful life gain staples. It's actually kind of ridiculous. And also, we're a life gain deck. I've already talked about this combo before, but we can indeed go infinite with like Marauding Blight Priest or Veto plus Bloodthirsty Conqueror. And the really nice thing is that all these cards are just amazing in the deck by themselves. But then when you put them together, you just instantly win the game, which is also very nice. I was really genuinely surprised at how powerful this deck can actually be due to just the amazing reprints and new card support for the life gain archetype in Foundations. There's really good reprints here and also really good new cards, and that really makes the entire deck that much more powerful. And the final Foundations only commander deck is going to be the classic Elf Ball. Foundations went hard on Elf Ball support. It's a supported archetype. And Lathril, one of the best, most powerful commanders, one of the most popular commanders in the entire format, is here to lead it. Whenever Lathril deals combat damage, you make that many 1/1 Elf Warrior creature tokens, which is an amazing token generator, especially if you can pump up Lathril's power. And then it also acts as a win condition, a secondary finisher, by just tapping a bunch of elves to drain your opponents for 10, and then you gain 10. So once you have a giant elf army and you don't need to attack anymore or whatever, or attacking is no longer an option, you just tap your elves and drain your opponents out that way. So like I said, Foundations comes with a ton of the best Elf Ball cards. So we have stuff like Leafcrown Visionary to pump up the team, but also draw a bunch of cards. Elvish Archdruid also pumps up the team, but taps for insane amounts of mana. We got Dionysus, Elvish Archdruid, which is a brand new card. It just means that whenever you're tapping your elves, either attacking with them or just tapping them for mana, they get to untap and do it all again, tap them for even more mana or whatever out of their activated abilities, and also grow them in the process, which is great for Lathril, for example, because the more you grow her, the more elves you create whenever she deals combat damage. There's a nice little synergy over there. And then we've got other really good support pieces like Tyvar Kell. Our elves now can tap for black, and then he does a whole bunch of really powerful elf synergy things with all his abilities. And then to win the game, we could drain people out with Lathril's ability, but we have a bunch of ways to also pump up the team and swing for lethal. Banner of Kinship is a really great one. Like if you have 10 elves on the battlefield, you could just drop down Banner of Kinship and now all your elves are 10/10s for the rest of the game. Or Preposterous Proportions, you could give them plus 10% and Vigilance until end of turn, and that's usually enough to just end the game as well. Now, basically all these cards, these traditional Elf Ball cards, are all in green. However, black offers a ton of extra value to the deck to round out the deck, and it also helps fix the main weakness of Elf Ball, which is just board wipes. Right? Like Elf Ball is so good at vomiting out your entire hand because it just ramps like crazy. So you ramp out your entire hand, you have all your elves, all your cards are on the table, and then somebody board wipes you and you're basically out of the game, right? You can't rebuild from there. But black allows you to rebuild, and it offers an Aristocrats sub-theme to the deck. So something like Liliana Dreadhorde General. If you have a bunch of elf tokens on the battlefield from Lathril or whatever, you can start sacrificing them, make your opponents sacrifice better things, and draw cards. And then if you get board wiped, whatever, you get to draw a card for each elf that died, and you can immediately redeploy. Same thing with like Priests of Forgotten Gods. If you have 2 elf tokens on the battlefield, you can make your opponents sacrifice more notable creatures and then draw cards and ramp. And like Wardens of the Cycle, which also hammers home this Aristocrats sub-theme to it. It's an elf, and it also rewards you by drawing cards or gaining life whenever you're sacrificing at least one thing on your turn. So that's the deck. It's basically Elf Ball with an Aristocrats sub-theme to it to keep the card draw flowing. Lathril is incredibly powerful, elves are incredibly powerful, and there's a ton of just high-impact reprints here and new cards to round out the deck and really make it a menace at your average play group. And those are all 5 of the Foundations only commander decks. If you are a new player, I hope this is useful to you, or if you're a veteran player and you're seeing new players getting into the game through Foundations and they have a lot of Foundations cards laying around and they want to get into Commander, maybe send them this video and hopefully it can help them out as well. That's all for now. This is just a quick video while I work on bigger projects for the end of the year. So like and subscribe if you like this sort of stuff, and I'll see you all hopefully very soon with the next video. So until then, friends, see ya!